Hello again, and thank you everyone for tuning in to the Apologists in Detroit vlogcast. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that is, I think, a very prevalent topic, but it's a very subtle topic. It's very difficult for, I think, the average person to look in the mirror and consider themselves to necessarily struggle with this problem. So today I want to talk about intellectual honesty amongst Christians. Now, it's intellectual honesty has the potential to really touch on so many different areas, and so I really want to kind of narrow down to what I'm talking about today. Now, what I'm not attempting to aim at today so much. There's a lot of things with topics within Christendom that Christians debate over, like the Genesis chapter 1 and 2 account and what's that implying, the election versus the free will verses in the Bible, and what they're implying. But that's not what I'm really talking about today when I'm addressing intellectual honesty. I'm also addressing intellectual honesty from the standpoint of kind of general Christian theology. Okay, most of you, if you've watched some of my videos before, you knew I grew up with a Pentecostal background, and so although I see nothing wrong with Pentecostalism, I do see a lot of poor theology coming from that camp in general as a whole these days, and having many loved ones and friends that still are trafficking in those denominations that are Pentecostal. I really wanted to explain my perspective, but oftentimes I think it gets ignored because there's not enough intellectual honesty there. There's not enough people that are actually considering the words that I'm saying and considering the scriptures that I'm quoting or pointing out. They more so just look at what I'm saying and just say I disagree with it. And so I just wanted to point out a text in the Bible and really just kind of encourage people to really be intellectually honest when you are engaging with, or when you come across things, or when you hear other Christians say things about Christianity that you may not initially agree with. Okay, so to give kind of an example, okay, I growing up in Pentecostal, with a Pentecostal background, on my way out of the Pentecostal movement 15 or so years ago, what was really becoming prevalent in the church was a word faith theology. Me growing up here in the church, probably our biggest word faith church was a church called Word of Faith, and it grew to have a huge membership, probably like 10,000, 15,000 members or so, and they bought an old college campus in a local suburb of Detroit called Southfield, Michigan. And at one point, they were just like, its pastor was almost like a celebrity. And, its members were, pretty devout, And so it almost became like the theology of this word faith brand of theology was true because of the fact that it was popular. And so when you would talk to people, they wouldn't necessarily interact with the scriptures that you were pointing out to them. They would just think, okay, you're the individual that's going against the grain. You don't know how to read the Bible. This person or these people doing all of these people can't be wrong. And when I look at the scriptures, what I was trying to find was a text for this, and I did. I found for Acts chapter 17, and I thought it was a great text. Okay, so here's Paul. Paul goes to, at the beginning, first 9 verses of Acts. Paul goes to Thessalonica. Okay, and while he's there, he goes to the synagogue and he preaches the gospel. He teaches from the prophets and from the Psalms and the Old Testament writers. how Jesus was this Messiah that they should have been looking for, and that he had come and been crucified. Now, think about this. You're talking about people. You're talking about the Jews. He went to the synagogue, so it's primarily Jews that he's reasoning with. And these people who were born all their lives and from birth had been raised and told, you're God's chosen person, and you are the seed of Abraham, and all of these promises are yours. And to find out that this was a mistake, and that the Messiah was not just a liberator of the Jewish people, but it was a liberator. He was a liberator of all humanity, not from the world's systems and kingdoms, but from our sins, from sin, death, and destruction. Okay, so this is a huge pill to swallow. So what you see in Thessalonica in the first 9 verses of Acts chapter 17 is some of the Jews, listened to Paul and responded and said, this is right. And they began to follow Christ. And others said, I don't believe this, and began to persecute Paul. Okay, so I'm going to leave it right there for a moment. So then I'm going to go to the next 3 verses. Okay, so you got 10, 11, and 12. Paul goes to Berea. Paul goes into the synagogue and he preaches the message of the gospel, that through the prophets and the Psalms and the Old Testament writers, that Jesus was the Messiah. He was not the liberator of the Jewish people from this world system, but he was the liberator of all of humanity from their sin. And so the Bereans, it says, were more noble. They searched the scriptures. In other words, they researched. They didn't just take this Apostle Paul, who had no doubt had a reputation. He was a very prominent Jewish teacher before he became a Christian, and then all of the things that were going on in the book of Acts concerning Paul traveling, preaching the gospel, getting arrested, and things like that. And so, no doubt Paul had a reputation that these people had probably heard. And so, but rather than taking just the reputation of Paul, they looked into the scriptures, they read what Paul was talking about, they weighed it versus what had actually happened in real time and space with the person of Jesus Christ, and they drew the conclusion that Paul was right. Jesus was this Messiah. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm contrasting the actions of the two different groups. Okay, you have the ones in Thessalonica, they didn't reason and search the scriptures to see if what Paul was saying was true. They just assumed he was wrong and began to persecute him. Didn't even interact with Paul's specific case for Jesus being the Christ. They just persecuted Paul as the person. Whereas the Bereans actually searched the scriptures and realized Paul was right. So when it comes to intellectual honesty, I think that this is a great example of how we should respond to when people of even our own faith, other Christians, say, hey, this brand or ideology of Christianity that you're embracing is wrong. I love my brothers and sisters of all denominations, and I don't have a problem with denominations personally myself. I think there are a lot of other things that we could focus on as Christians other than worrying about the fact that there's so many denominations. But when I do see aberrant Christian theology, when I see theologies like the word faith theology, where, really, I think that any person who subscribes to people like T.D. Jakes and Joyce Meyer and now Joseph Prince and just any of these word faith teachers, Creflo Dollar, if you subscribe to these people, I think that you would have a hard time going to the scriptures and finding these things that they're telling you in the scriptures. I don't think you'll find a single person in the entire New Testament, not one of Jesus' apostles, not one of the disciples, or not any writer of any epistle or anything else in the New Testament that themselves are speaking anything into existence, let alone telling any of us to speak things into existence. I think that's a mistaken notion that someone reads into the Bible, not something that they read out of the Bible. But it's not easy to hear that. You know, I listened to Greg Koukl's Tactics in Defending Your Faith CDs, and one of the quotes that he mentioned in there is people don't like it when you mess with their religion, and I find that to be so very true. I mean, very well-meaning people, very honest people, when you tell them something that they're not used to. I mean, find a person who reads the Genesis account in the young earth perspective and try to dialogue with them about the earth potential, the Bible not giving us a age of the earth, and you're likely to get into a fight or a debate, because these people, you know, they don't want to hear that. People don't like it when you mess with their religion. And so I think it's important for us, if we want to model Christ, if we want to be the type of people that God is calling us to be, I think what we have to begin to do is to learn to interact with one another with gentleness and respect, like 1 Peter 3:15 says to. When you're giving an account, you have to do it with gentleness and respect. I think that's just insightful wisdom from God, because he knows that character is an important part of getting your message across. When you have poor character, it takes away from your message. When you have good character, it adds to the credibility of your message by giving a person a reason to listen to you. And then secondly, I think that if we love God, we shouldn't be afraid of being wrong. I mean, no one's always right. I mean, I think of Acts, the end of Acts 17, where I think it's the 30th verse, where Paul said, "In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he calls on all men to believe in Jesus Christ." And I think that that's what we have to realize. Hey, right now we see dimly. We're likely to have, in some areas of our theology, some error. And that's totally normal. We're human. We're fallible. That's totally expected. But what we should at least be is intellectually honest. We should at least be able to look into the scriptures and to read things in context and to assess whether or not what we're hearing or what we're being challenged on, whether or not this has the potential to be true, rather than just assuming that we're right. Well, I hope this video is encouraging and edifying to many of you, and I hope that that you see the reason to heed the counsel of it, because I think that it's good, solid, biblical wisdom and counsel. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing you guys' responses. Boom.